G'day, this is Captainoob, and this video is going to be a guide for my strength build. There's a lot to cover in this guide, including special distribution, gameplay tactics, leveling up, and even resource management. To help break this guide up a little bit, however, I'll be providing timestamps in the description to different segments of the video, and if you're even more impatient than that, I've also linked this build using the Nukesdragons build planner, so you can copy it off there. Let's get into it. The purpose of the strength build is to get the most combat effectiveness out of heavy guns, whether they're energy, ballistic, or explosive, shotguns, melee, either two-handed or one-handed, and also unarmed weapons. It's a build meant for versatility, being able to perform well with multiple different weapon types. Just like my stealth commando build, we're not really optimized for team play, as we only have 2 charisma, but we've got perks at our disposal that can potentially help team play. This build can deal a lot of damage, so you'll never struggle against basic enemies provided you've got good gear, and you'll never have to rely on other players to do the damage for you, so if you enjoy playing alone, this is the build for you. Doing lots of damage with heavy guns is easy, just bring your ammo. Shotgun, melee, and unarmed weapons have to be a little bit more involved with stealth. This build is not without limitation, however. In the name of versatility, we've made a few compromises. The low endurance means we aren't good at tanking damage, which can be potentially problematic, and the range game is weak for the strength build user as we can only get medium range at best with heavy guns. We can remedy these weaknesses a little bit somewhat with the correct perks and items, but it's still a pretty glass cannon build. Players who are accustomed to using defense builds will have an extremely hard time adjusting, so beware. Mistakes with this build will be punished. Playing with skill and good build planning will make this build extremely rewarding. So let's take a look at the multiple ways of speccing our character to make use of all the weapon types. Alrighty, so here we are in game, and here's a special distribution. We've got 15 in strength, 5 in perception, 2 in endurance, 2 in charisma. Those 2 are my dump stats. Don't particularly think any of those perks in charisma or endurance are that good, at least for the purpose of a strength build. Intelligence is 11, agility is 12, and luck is sitting at 9. So first of all, strength. This is the part we'll be switching out a lot of perks depending on what we're actually using to do damage, so I'm just going to chuck on what I usually have on and I'll explain why these perks are good. So, for a heavy gunner, having ammo weighing 90% less means you just have warehouses of ammo on you at a time, which means you can just keep on shooting. Something like a minigun, which uses thousands of rounds per, hour of gameplay, that is perfect for something like that. Even a 50 cal, which the bullets, weigh a little bit more than your standard 5mm. That's definitely a much needed perk, and here's where the limitations of that come in. Since that's taking up 2, that means when we're going for a melee build with this character is that we're going to have 2 potential things that can increase our damage, mainly with Incisor, to limit our damage a little bit, but for the sake of versatility in the strength build, yeah, that's definitely something that we do need. So first of all, we'll go for a little bit of a heavy gunner build sort of thing in strength. So we'll get heavy gunner of the expert variety. There's a standard. So I'm going to take 9 points to actually put this together. So that's an additional 60% damage on that, which is a good starting point. But there's more we can do. Usually I go for lock and load here for faster reload times, and mind you, that is a super important perk. But if you find yourself carrying lots of heavy guns at any particular moment, bare arms is actually one of the better weighing perks, because heavy guns do weigh a lot, so it does make quite a bit of sense to actually use 3 of your strength points to reduce the weight, because that means you can carry a bunch of other things in your inventory. But usually I go for 1 rank here in bullet shield, just to have a little bit more damage resistance while firing. But yep, that's basically how I'd set up my strength as a heavy gunner. But moving over to perception, this kind of depends, because if I'm using weapons like shotguns, I chuck on skeet shooter. If I'm using explosive stuff, not explosive weapons because they don't benefit from this, but grenadier is good. So usually I probably go for something like 3 in concentrated fire, so I can easily get those shots on in VATS, because a lot of your heavy guns will take a lot of AP per shot, or they have a rate of fire that would say make them eat up that AP bar in a matter of seconds. So good to have that concentrated fire just to get those couple of hits in when you can, which is nice. You can chuck on awareness, but I usually go for a little bit of bonus damage against glowing things, and that kind of fills out what I can do in perception. And perception is sitting nice at 5. There's some dead weight perks in it, but not all the time though. It's useful. I'll get to more on that later, but obviously endurance is easy. That one's going to be rejuvenated. It's one of the more combat-oriented perks, because it gives you 50 health, which is good for, counteracting some of the mutations, which we'll get to later, but also it allows you to regenerate AP quickly. And for some reason, it doesn't say it on the card, which is kind of strange. But anyways, regardless of that, we're going to go Lone Wanderer in Charisma. If you are, say, playing as a team, though, don't be shy to chuck on Tenderizer, because Lone Wanderer will be doing you absolutely no benefits whatsoever. So we can move on to Intelligence, which is the broken tree, apparently. We'll just have to scroll over and pretend that we're on console or something and not being able to click to where we want. Anyways, regardless of that, we're going to chuck on batteries included, and this is what I said about versatility, energy weapons, explosives, and also ballistics. And ballistics, or energy weapons in general, are good, but mainly it's the fusion cores, because in a strength build, the fusion cores can mow you down, and since you be using power armor to increase your damage somewhat, it is definitely a good perk to have. Unlike the stealth commander, where you can probably get away with using batteries included, I do actually recommend this one. Now, for when I'm using non-explosive heavy guns, I usually chuck on Gunsmith, but if I'm using legendary explosives on, I'll chuck on Demo Expert for more damage, obviously. And usually, if I'm using stuff that is bloodied, I'll switch over to Nerd Rage. I'll use the remaining 3 points on that. But if it's not Nerd Rage and I'm using a heavy gun in power armor, I'll definitely chuck on Stabilize, because this is a really good perk, by the way, because it gives you more accuracy and more chance to avoid armor. There she goes. So 45% chance to ignore, 45% ignoring armor. That's huge. That's almost the anti-armor legendary effect. And if you have an anti-armor legendary heavy weapon, I think that stacks to 95%, which is massive. Alright, so agility is kind of easy. 5 of those points are going straight into adrenaline, which gives us 7 left. And this depends on what you want to use this for. If you want to have if you're going to be in a brawling fight and would like to stay alive, if you're in PvP and you desperately don't want to die, I'd chuck on Born Survivor. If I'm in power armor, maybe when my AP regening legendary armor bits aren't working, maybe I'd go over and chuck on some Action Girl perks. Dead Man Sprinting for bloodied stuff. Obviously, Escape Artist is going on because it's one of the things you can just drop down in a caution whatever you want. Gunfill is broken right now, but it's a good perk for when they eventually fix that. It's a really good perk, to be honest. Marathoner, if you want to run around quickly. This is better for melee-focused builds, but we'll keep on moving through this. Sneak is good, but there's honestly not much point in sneaking with heavy weapons. So honestly, probably what I would do is chuck on maybe 3 ranks of Action Girl, because I'll be in power armor, wanting that fast AP regen, and maybe 2 ranks of Marathoner there, so I can sprint around and cost less AP, because if I'm going to use that with a jetpack at the same time, I kind of want as much AP as I can, and we'll get to the use of that a little bit later. But moving on to the luck stat here, I want to chuck on One Gun Army for heavy gunner builds, and that'll give us some staggering and some crippling chances, which is very much appreciated. You'll see it, or you'll see it when I take down a Scorch Beast. If I can cripple one of the wings, it drops to the ground and basically kill it very easily. I chuck on a rank of Class Freak because I ain't got nothing really better to do. Bloody Mess for obviously more damage, and of course, if I can find Starch Genes here, I want to chuck that on before I start losing mutations. So there you have it. That's one of the many ways we can configure the strength build. This one is for heavy guns, using non-explosive heavy guns by the look. So yeah, if I was to whip out a minigun, maybe it's anti-armor, maybe it's executioners, I'd be set to go with this. Okay, so I've quickly thrown together a build what I'd do if I had something bloodied and a heavy, say a bloodied, a bloodied missile launcher. I've chucked on Grenadier for more explosive radius, Nerd Rage is there, Demo Expert is there, Bloody Mess is there to increase the thing's damage, but instead of chucking on heavy gunners, which don't work for explosive weapons, it's just Demolitions Expert, which increases it. What I'm going to do instead is chuck on Lock and Load, because that applies to those things. Ordnance Express to, help lower the weight of the ammunition. And here's where it gets a little bit flexible, because we're kind of out of things to help us out. Bullet Shield you could chuck on, but if you're using a missile launcher, that'll only be when you're firing it, which is not a constant thing. See how this guy's got a minigun? That's sort of suggesting that you would use it with a minigun. A couple of things, obviously heavy guns are heavy, so bare arms is actually kind of a good thing to have here. You can tell that my weight just clocked over to not bad, but yeah, we're using power armor, so that's not going to help us all that much. Blocker, we can probably just step away from enemies, so that's not going to help us all that much either. So what does that leave us with? We could chuck on some gladiator perks and, you know, have a knife as a backup if they get a little bit too close, which is what I recommend doing because you can't make primaries out of explosive weapons. They're not that good. But yeah, there's a little bit of flexibility you can have here. Maybe you want to get a lot of damage, you know, cut through if we've got a knife on us, or maybe if we're outside of power armor, what we can do is chuck on Iron Fist. You know, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it, but for, you know, for the strength build with heavy explosive guns, there's kind of there's a lot of things you can do here, so it's kind of up to you. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend using these, but yeah, just so you've got an idea of what you can do with it, then yeah, I'll leave this bit in. Why not? If I was, however, to spec into shotgunning, say I've got a bladed explosive double barrel shotgun, what I'd do is I'd chuck on all of the shotgunner perks, which I'm pretty sure I might have missed. There's Master Shotgunner. There's the rest of them, Shotgunner and Scattershot. Very, very good perks, by the way. I do recommend them. And depending on how you're feeling, I usually chuck the extra rank of this in Barbarian or Basher. I rarely even bash people with my gun, so Barbarian is a good idea just to give us a little bit more you know, damage resistance when we're outside of power armor. But yes, these obviously increase the damage. It's another 60%. But Scattershot is a really good perk, especially for reloading stuff faster. If you've got a slow reloading shotgun, say the pump action shotgun, this will absolutely be super helpful in just helping you reload that thing, because it takes a while, right? Moving over to Perception, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting because it changes a little bit. I've got Skeet Shooter at rank 3, and I usually chuck on 2 ranks of Concentrated Fire 2 if I want to use this thing in VATS. If not, I'd probably replace that again with a bit of Glow Sight for more damage against enemies who are, you know, of the glowing variety. Moving over to Intelligence again. Come on, game, let me have this. And say it's an explosive, yeah, bladed explosive double barrel, and what I'll do is I'll chuck on Demo Expert and again Nerd Rage just to set myself under Nerd Rage threshold, which allows me to do a lot more damage. And an Intelligence, whoops, and in Agility actually, what I want to do here is chuck on Enforcer. Where is that? Enforcer is somewhere over here. And like I said before, there are some team play aspects. This is one of those team play perks, because what you can do is maybe if you're in an SBQ fight, you can just shoot it with a shotgun a few times, it'll drop to the ground, and everyone with their hammers can go and beat the crap out of it, which is pretty good. Again, gun fu is something that I would recommend, but if it's broken right now, so we can probably not do that. Covert Operative is something that I do when I have a suppressed shotgun. Obviously, a double barrel can't be suppressed, so what I'll probably do is chuck on Evasive, because that'll give me a little bit more damage or damage resistance due to incoming gunfire. And Serendipity is going to be in luck, so I can resist some health. So this is kind of a basic example of what I do. It's sort of your own intuition. You got to figure out which perks will help you, which perks will not. Drop the perks which don't help you, attach the perks which will, and you'll find yourself having a pretty solid build. But there we go. We've optimized for a bladed explosive double barrel shotgun here. Okay, next thing. Say we want to spec into something of the melee variety. We're going to go one-handed because that popped up first. So we'll chuck on the 3 ranks of Gladiator once again. Obviously, Martial Artist goes on because it helps you swing faster, which leaves us with 1 more point. Now, usually I'd like to go with 1 in Incisor here, and you can tell that if I highlight this thing, I'm only ignoring 25 out of a maximum 75% of target's armor ignored, which again is a drawback of having Bandolier here, and you know, the versatility of the build does sort of cuck itself here, but yeah. If you decide to run full melee, what you can do is just get rid of Bandolier and go full 3 ranks in Incisor, and that'll be probably the best options for you. Not much is going on in Perception. We've got Glow Sight up because there's nothing else that can really help us, to be honest, and Awareness is there because I don't think Concentrated Fire is going to help us all that much. Makeshift Warrior to make our things do or them conditioned to break less. And since we're doing melee with stealth, what's going to happen is I'm going to chuck on 2 ranks of sneak and a ninja, and escape artist for, you know, sneaking and doing a lot of damage with the sneak attack bonuses, and that's there if we get our health too low. Now, this is not a bladed weapon. Say we've got an instigating swing speed combat knife, right? And I'm not running at Nerd Rage threshold all the time, so technically these are dead weight. If you're not interested in, you know, using the blade weapons, using Nerd Rage, what you can do is you can take 3 points out of that, maybe add them to agility for more sneaky sneaks, or you could chuck them in luck for even more. But speaking of luck, we've got Bloody Mess, but I've usually chuck on Critical Savvy when it comes to these builds like this, because, you know, if your crit's only consuming half of your crit meter, or basically half, you can get crits basically double the speed, and couple that with luck 9, that's actually not a bad thing to have. Now, if you were to take those points in Nerd Rage and pour them into luck, for example, what I'd suggest doing is chucking 4-leaf clover in, and what that'll do is just give you even more criticals. The more criticals you can get, the more damage you can get, which is very, very good. And last but not least comes Unarmed, which is quite interesting because the way they do it is kind of weird. So they offset it with giving the unarmed weapons a whole lot of damage bonus when compared to the base damage of other weapons, but basically the only perk that increases this thing's damage is Iron Fist. There's no Expert or Master Iron Fist, it's just that one, which leaves us 10 points, which is kind of where it gets interesting. So what I usually do is I chuck on Barbarian for, you know, more strength equals more damage resistance, which is really good. You could chuck on Blocker, but I seem to... I've chucked it on before, but honestly, I'm thinking Incisor is the better thing for damage output, so that means we've got 4 left. Obviously, Martial Artist needs to come on, because if we punch faster, we do better damage, and this is where the Blocker comes in. We can just take 15% less instead of 45% less, so we're not losing a whole lot there, just an extra 30 damage when melee attacks hit us, so it's not too bad, and if you sneak around anyway, that's not going to be a problem because they can't hit what they can't see. So apparently this has got, let's see, Nerd Rage, we've got Sneaky, Deadman, Sprinting, okay, Bloodied Power Fist, that's what we're spec'd for here. Alright, so that kind of covers everything, I think. Back to the scripted content. Now that we know what we're aiming for with the endgame, let's talk about getting there. Just like my Stealth Commando build, you'll find the Nukesdragons build planner thing in the description, just like last time. What I did to level up this character early on was use melee weapons exclusively, just to save up on ammunition for later. Be sure to loot every weapon you see to scrap for stronger attachments for damage purposes as soon as you can. If you run into enemies that are higher than your level range, use ranged weapons or just switch servers. If you need a little bit more damage, you can prioritize filling strength up as soon as you can for more melee and unarmed bonus damage, and grabbing power armor early is recommended for tanking damage. I can tell you from experience that trying to punch above your weight without stealth is more than headache inducing. Killing things around your level is slow, but it's the least painful way to level up. Take part in as many events as you can, and also complete as many quests as you can for larger XP jumps. Grabbing power armor is a good way of surviving when it comes to taking things that are above your level. Use it wisely though, as fusion cores are few and far between when starting off. If you can find sentry bots to kill, you can grab heaps of fusion cores off their wrecks. To get the best out of your build, you need to spec full into the weapon type that you're using, and your playstyle will vary accordingly depending on what you're spec'd on. Heavy gunners use powerful but heavy weapons to either fill their victims with lead until they're dead, melt them into goo, or to blow them into tiny little pieces. Using power armor is a good idea if you have a weapon that benefits out of the stabilize perk, as increased combat effectiveness comes out of that armor penetration and accuracy. Be mindful of what perks can help you. Filling up your build with dead weight food perks is just like asking for things to kill you. This weapon type is not the most effective at long range, but if range is your game, this is your best bet. Stealth isn't really an option for this playstyle, but generally they hit hard enough to not warrant the use of stealth at the cost of many bullets. Farming tin cans from Crevasse Dam, Top of the World, Eastern Regional Penitentiary, Camden Park, and White Springs Golf Club can net you lots of lead and steel. Combine cloth and acid for gunpowder. When it comes to using shotguns, apart from the double barrel, using suppressors on shotguns is a good idea to boost the damage whilst utilizing stealth. Due to recent shotgun nerfs, you always have to be in spitting distance to get good damage out of your shotguns, so you've got great damage potential, but being up close and personal against melee-based enemies can be risky. Using a perk like Enforcer is a great counter against melee enemies, as a few shots will stop them in their tracks. You'll need a little bit of extra plastic to create shotgun shells, so tag plastic in your components to pick up every single bit you can. Also, Watoga High School is a great place for finding heaps of plastic. Swing by there for a quick plastic fix. One-handed and two-handed melee weapons in this build are a little bit more than you might see out of the average all-rise wielding Minecraft power armor wearing Grognak. No, we play like a ninja. Due to our low endurance, we can't take many hits, but that's okay because there's a lot of benefits for taking the stealthy path. You get huge damage multipliers for ninja sneak bonuses, which if everything's set up correctly can do in excess of 10,000 damage. Secondly, since they can't see you, they can't hurt you. You can effectively avoid damage directly this way. Thirdly, enemies can't block what they can't see. When an enemy blocks you with a melee weapon, they resist all your damage and it also staggers you. Whilst you're stunned, you are super vulnerable to being shot or hit with another melee weapon, inducing another stagger. This can kill you very quickly when there are multiple enemies around, so sidestepping all that nonsense is a great way to stay alive. The only conceivable drawback is the slower movement speed of sneaking, but if you're smart about it, you can quickly sprint and go back into sneaking without being detected. The same goes for unarmed weapons, but it gives you a little bit more wiggle room as the survivability perks you can equip makes you a little bit more tanky, just to compensate for the fact that you can't utilize these weapons whilst in power armor. Using stealth still is the best bet for damage because all of the aforementioned benefits still apply here. Explosive heavy guns are not worth using as of this recording. Whilst you can get a lot of damage in a single shot, your ammo is heavy, rare, and requires 3 perks to lighten them to an acceptable state. You'll find that explosive heavy guns also have horrendous durability, so using them as a primary weapon is never a good option. The gear I recommend for the strength build is Gatling guns for heavy gunner setups, combat shotguns for when shotgunning, super sledges or pole hooks for two-handed melee playstyles, combat knives for one-handed, and power fists for unarmed. Whilst you don't have to use these weapons exactly, as there are a lot of different weapons to choose from, I do recommend these weapons and I'll explain why. The Gatling gun is an incredibly ammo-efficient weapon because of its high damage model. You'll find that feeding it is easy with super mutants armed with miniguns tend to drop about 105 mils, and crafting them with Ammo Smith 2 grants you about 150, which will get you great mileage. The attachments are somewhat hard to find as Gatling guns are somewhat rare. Boss enemies marked with crowns can drop these sometimes, so keep an eye out for those. An honorable mention goes out to the LMG too, as it's got an incredibly high DPS. Combat shotguns are a nice blend of DPS and ammo capacity. They are the only shotguns in the game, not counting any energy guns, that can be boosted by a shotgunner that can actually give you armor penetration, as it's got a magazine attachment point. You can also put a suppressor on it too, which helps boost your damage with stealth. It will cut down on your range significantly, however, so you will need to close the gap with your suppressed shotguns. For two-handed weapons, not much is better than super sledges. The high damage is second to none, and when coupled with stealth, can output a very impressive amount of damage. They're easy to find as well. Super sledges can be found on super mutants from level 30. All Rise is a unique you can get, which offers a bit of extra health and is very light on your inventory. Pick that up with a Mare for the Day side quest. You'll find that other legendary super sledges are better than All Rise though. A pole hook can be just as powerful with the added bonus of armor penetration too, so honorable mention goes out to that. One-handed weapons are made for stealth melee gameplay. Whilst your total damage per strike is lower, you can swing them much faster and they're much more quiet. Combat knives are the only knives which you can actually craft serrated blades on, which gives it more damage over its Bowie or Cultist counterparts. There's also a stealth blade modification which gives you another plus 50% sneak attack damage multiplier, which is definitely good if you want to stealth it up. Armor is a no-brainer. Unyielding is definitely the best armor set you can get, as you can get huge bonuses to your special stats. That'll boost your strength for melee and unarmed damage, perception for VATS accuracy, charisma for flogging items to robot vendors for more caps, intelligence for a nice XP gain bonus, agility for AP and sneak bonuses, and luck for critical acquisition and finding items in higher condition, you know, for what that's worth. You'll find that with unyielding armor, you'll boost your melee damage significantly with the right mutations and perks. Power armor is a little bit more important than the stealth commando build, as it can tie directly into the damage output of your heavy guns with the stabilize perk. I recommend the XO1 power armor due to its increased radiation resistance and ease of finding mods when compared to other suits. The parts I recommend is the VATS matrix for the head, so if your weapons eat up a lot of AP per shot, you don't have to waste as much AP on misses. The torso has a jetpack, which other than allowing you to fly, which is awesome by the way, the tactical advantage of being able to take off in the air and drop explosives down on your enemies whilst being out of the explosion radius is a great way not to blow yourself up. Whilst you can do pretty well without mutations, they sure do help. I recommend having 4 mutations: Speed Demon, Bird Bones, Marsupial, and Adrenal Reaction. I'll talk about how these are good in detail. Speed Demon makes you run and reload faster by 20%, allowing you to speed up your gameplay by allowing you to move faster, making melee much easier to close the gap and make the kill. The reload speed is all round useful, especially when the reload is potentially long. Looking at you, pump action shotgun. Marsupial allows you to leap much higher than normal when you jump. This is useful for avoiding gunfire, melee enemies, or explosions. It's a great indirect survivability perk that allows you to easily avoid threats, and it synergizes very well with Bird Bones too. The drawback is less intelligence, which is pretty mild. Bird Bones makes you fall slower and it gives you an agility at the cost of strength. The strength drawback is going to reduce our melee damage slightly, but remember, we're built for versatility, and the combat advantage of a slower fall means we can avoid explosions much easier, which is particularly important if we're using an explosive heavy gun. Adrenal reaction is a great way of getting extra damage, but the cost of 50 hit points is a problem if you're going to get hit a lot. Notice how I said if. This is why running stealth is the most important thing whilst using melee weapons, so you don't actually take those extra hits. The benefits of this mutation synergize very well with any bloodied weapon, particularly with unyielding armor and melee weapons. There are also 2 mutations which I don't use in the name of versatility, as these will be a detriment to my build as a whole. If you spec fully into melee, then knock yourselves out, I don't really give a fuck. Twisted Muscles is a mutation which grants 25% boost to melee damage at the cost of weapon accuracy. Accuracy is very important for any gun user, so you can probably see how this might potentially be a problem. I found that even without Twisted Muscles, I've never struggled for melee damage anyways. Talons is another mutation which increases your unarmed weapons damage and adds bleed damage to your strikes. It also reduces your agility by 4 points. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel like running around with less action points when I'm not using unarmed weapons, so that's why I don't use it. Since Nuclear Winter has made a joke out of adventure and survival PvP, I'll be brief. PvP is a little bit easier now that Assassin Sentinel is not that broken anymore. Melee and unarmed are very powerful in PvP and can easily one-shot players because most health pools are around 300-ish. Pop a Stealth Boy so you can easily close the gap on any ranged weapon user and kill them easily. Draw them indoors and you'll be swimming in caps. Shotguns that are explosive can work in PvP, but if you're gonna go range, I recommend using something like an LMG. The rate of fire lets you chop through players' health bar very quickly, and since its rate of fire is so high, Assassin Sentinel and Serendipity will only slow it down a little bit. You'll find that it's got enough DPS to cut anything down no matter what they're wearing. So there you have it, that was my guide on how to play with my strength build. I think I've covered everything this time, so if you have any questions, I'll try to answer what I can. Hope if you decide to take on this build, it'll grant you a lot of success and fun. Thank you very much for watching.